Welcome back to the ET Roundtable. This is a weekly discussion about theories and maybe practices and explanations and understandings and misunderstandings about the UFO phenomena and whatever that means, who the ETs are, what we can make of that. I'm Alan Steinfeld, but tonight's host is Henrietta Weekes, who actually is part of my book, Making Contact. So Henrietta, go ahead, take it over, do your thing, introduce what the topic will be tonight. So thanks.
Thanks so much, Alan. I hope you can hear me out there. Connection's a bit unstable. But we're going to be talking about, and oh, have I frozen? Sorry. And I've got two fantastic people. A lot of people know David Metcalfe. Yeah.
Just saying we're all a little unstable, but go ahead. Go ahead. I said we're all.
We are indeed. And how does that connect to the UFO phenomenon? You know, who knows? But tonight we do have two of my very favorite thinkers, ideas people in the world. They're both writers. What I'd like to do is get them to parlay and just discuss, you know, their thoughts, their research, their experiences, their own personal experiences. I know that my good friend Elliot has had a couple of those, and maybe Dave does too. But why don't you both, like Dave, do you want to just start with introducing yourself and your work, however you want to talk about yourself, and then Elliot, and then just go at it?
Sure.
My particular interest is like what's for tonight too, let's take it beyond this huge explosion in mainstream media. Like, is that a revelation, or is it a obfuscation, or is it a mix of the two? You know, what is the revelation? Because I know that's what we're interested in. That's what we're trying to like look at, right?
Yeah, it's
so Dave, take it away.
Well, thanks. This is going to be fun. I've known Elliot for many years. So my background is in comparative religions and kind of social theory. I'm currently the editor-in-chief for the Windbridge Research Center's Journal of Interdisciplinary Consciousness Studies. And I started a thing back in 2011 called Liminal Analytics, which kind of was my spaceship into these realms. And then shortly after that, I started editing for Reality Sandwich, before it was in its current incarnation, when it was under Daniel Pinchbeck and Ken Johnson, or Ken Jordan actually. So that was where I met Elliot, who was also associated with the fine people at Reality Sandwich, and we met up in New York when I was visiting for some events that I was putting on with Morbid Anatomy, in the observatory group, focused on parapsychology and consciousness studies. I think, was it the George Hanson one? Was that the actual one we had? Yeah. So Elliot, what do you do?
All right, yeah. My name is Elliot Edge. I wrote for Reality Sandwich and Disinformation. I'm on the Lifeboat Foundation. It's an existential risk think tank. I'm on their media and arts board as an advisor. I have never done anything in the capacity that just makes my resume sound nice. Besides that, I wrote for the Institute of Ethics and Emerging Technologies, essays on virtual reality as a concept, not so much the technology, but virtual reality as a metaphor for, thinking about cognition, thinking about reality itself and consciousness. That became very popular. It was the most read essays on that website when they came out for the year. And that became a book called 3 Essays on Virtual Reality. You can get it on Amazon. And that led to a career where now I'm an international speaker. I've spoken on 4 continents about everything from AI, risk, to Terence McKenna and psychedelics. I have a deep interest in UFOs my entire life, and And David and I always take a twist on them in terms of like what is really, we don't really go very much into just the pure history. We also kind of like, oh, and look at how it points to all this kind of stuff too. So that makes David like my favorite person to talk to about UFOs and all things unusual.
Yeah, and I guess we've lost our host, so we're hosting ourselves.
Oh, great! So it's like one of our old shows.
Yeah. So Henrietta had mentioned the news right now, right? And we have this Pentagon paper coming out at the end of the month. Or I guess it's not really, the Pentagon is involved in it, but it's an all government show for what they can pull together. Gone through the DNI, I think it is. But they are.
Well, let me just jump in a little bit and say, from this kind of alternate, culture perspective, someone's twisting the narrative, right? And they're twisting it to how they want us to perceive it. But what's underneath that? What do you both you guys think is going on?
Well, one of the things that I've been really interested in is what isn't being talked about, right? So if you go back and you actually look at all of the cases, since 1947, if you go back, I mean, there is so much depth to the number of people who've experienced something to do with what falls under the umbrella of the UFO phenomena. And one of the things that became kind of a focus in the 60s and 70s was what was called UFO Occupant Encounters, right? So like not just seeing it in the sky, but landings where there were a lot of reports throughout the world of a UFO would come down, it would land, there would be trace evidence in terms of burns, markings, and that kind of thing on the ground, and people would actually encounter a being coming out of the UFO. And it's really interesting to me how in the current mediation, where we're supposedly seeing the first time this has ever been taken seriously, that's stripped down to such a small subsection of encounters, specifically only the military ones. And I understand how that's effective in terms of shaping policy and shaping the way that the US government deals with it. But what I'm surprised by is that the media as a whole has really run with this very thin line and hasn't picked up any of the more even recent stuff, like the O'Hare sighting, right? The O'Hare sighting over the airport in Chicago, or the Stephenville sighting, which was massive and shook up Stephenville, Texas. And actually, when I did the Google Trends map, which was actually thanks to the Exometaverse folks who had mentioned using Google Trends, I started looking at that. And the Google Trends for UFO during the Stephenville case were actually higher than they are now in terms of how many people were actually looking at UFO. So surprisingly, the numbers of people that are actually interested in it aren't as high as a number of times since 2004, including the Stephenville incident. And there were some other ones. There was a UFO over an airport in China that actually shut down the airport. But a number of times since 2004, the numbers have been much higher in terms of public interest. And so that's got me thinking, what exactly is going on? Because we see, it's flooding the media, right? New York Times, their recent release of some of what's possibly going to be in the report, that was huge. That took over, a lot of the kind of political pundit shows, and that it repeated in CNN, where you've got the NASA administrator talking about NASA taking it seriously. And there's so much of a focus now, but in terms of the Google Trend map, it's not showing up as much as you would think it is. So that to me, I'm wondering why is that? I think my personal take on it is that the public is only so interested in military encounters, and until you have something that's a little bit more personal and real to people, that it only hits a certain subsection of the public who wouldn't already be interested in this. You know, what is one final point to this too with the Google Trend thing, the interest in extraterrestrials has actually been going up since 2004. So whereas the UFO
Wow.
question has a really shaky thing and isn't necessarily at its height right now, the interest in extraterrestrials is seeing a steady increase, and it's much more stable on higher numbers. So people are interested in the question of you know, life outside of this planet.
Right. I just want to say that is not mentioned at all in any of the papers, any of the broadcasts. No one is mentioning who's behind these vehicles.
Right.
So that completely disavowed from the narrative. So Elliot, what do you think?
Well, that's an important point, and I've been noticing that exact same thing with the media coverage, is that they have kind of, they'll mention it very briefly, like, is it aliens? And then everyone's like, is it China? And everyone, you know, once, I always think about, like, modern ufology is usually mentioned with the Kenneth Arnold case, right? But I was really interested in the airship scare cases of the UK, because these were fantastic displays of machines shooting spotlights down in the middle of the night. So there's like no stealth. There's no like attempt to, you know, be covert. So there seems to be this sort of thing where it makes me think of something that David and I have talked about quite a bit, which is the work of Mack, the guy behind Crypto Terrestrial. You know, if there are parts of the government that really, I don't see how they can't not go towards like, okay, who's piloting it? Who's piloting it? And you're right about the personal thing, because all we're getting is like this instrumentation data and eyewitness stuff from like the fighter pilots and everything. And that's very important to be out in the public sphere, especially because it came through the proper channels in the government. Yeah, that's very vital for our cultural dialogue about this. But the fact that, you know, 60 Minutes just did a show about it, which was particularly good for 60 Minutes. And they, you know, there was like, do you think it's aliens? And everyone just sort of says, I don't know, but we don't have it. And to me, that's just sort of like pussyfooting around, when of course, the only question is what is an alien? Because I really connect more towards the Mack angle, where it's like, they live here. There's so much UFO traffic seen every year that the idea that they just zap to our planet randomly for no reason. I mean, we're a high traffic zone for UFOs. I mean, there's tons of sightings every day. And then on top of that comes the question, why would they even care whether or not we blow ourselves to bits or poison our planet to death? To me, the only, and you see them going in and out of the water, which was just released on the government release, is that it went into the water. And, you know, the idea that they see them going into volcanoes and stuff. And so it's like, to me, what makes, and they sort of look like a weird version of us. To me, the only thing that really makes sense is that, you know, they like live here. And if they don't live here, they may as well. I mean, they're like hanging out without paying rent in my mind. Like, they're always here. So I think that probably what happened is that the private sector in the middle of the 20th century just took over all the UFO stuff and basically all got funneled to them. And I think maybe the military was left a little bit out of the loop because, you know, you had the ridicule, the giggle factor, all that kind of stuff. But I mean, like, for example, for the longest time, UFO reports had to go, if you're like in the FAA or something, you see UFO, they were like, don't tell us, tell Bob Bigelow. They had a hotline. Call Bob Bigelow. He's the one who actually interested. I don't even want to hear about this. So yeah, I mean, they're not bringing it up yet because I just think that it's just baby steps. You know, it's like, hey, the craft are real. And everyone's like, oh, the craft are real. Wait a minute. Who's driving it? So next, because they have to talk to Congress about it. And so Congress is definitely going to be like, all right, who's driving it? So that's where I think we're getting to next, you know, one baby step at a time. I don't really think there's like a terrible cover up going on right now. there is definitely a force that wants it out and another force that's like, I don't know if it's a great idea. But yeah, that's my read. Not as sinister as I think a lot of people probably think it is.
Yeah, and it's interesting with that, the civilian interest in it. I was reading Encounters with UFO Occupants by Coral and Jim Lorenzen, and they talk about their organization, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, which began in the kind of the mid 50s, and they were actually consulted by the Air Force because they had a better organization for how to get witnesses to talk about their experiences and to kind of gather the information. And they had a global network of people that worked for them, sort of like MUFON.
Who's that, David? Which organization are you talking about?
ARPO.
ARPO.
Yeah,
oh, right. That's the
and
Hynek organization. Wasn't that the J. Allen Hynek organization? Or
this was Coral and Jim Lorenzen. Hynek's was CUFOS, so the Center for UFO. But they yeah, and they had actually organized, kind of like MUFON is now, with where you had field investigators and that. But they had the Air Force coming to them, asking them questions, because they had better organization as a kind of grassroots group. And in terms of their filing system as well, they had been asked to come over and look at some of the Condon Report material. And the Condon Report was, the famous investigation that showed that there was nothing to see, despite the fact that a lot of the reports in the Condon Report remained anomalous even after the report was published. But they went to go look at the Condon material, and they were kind of appalled, and they came back to their own organization and cleaned up their own shop a little bit in terms of how they were organizing it, because it wasn't organized. But and I think it's interesting now, because we're in a time period back in the the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s even. So much of this funneled through newsletters, it funneled through individual groups and that, whereas now with social media, we're seeing a lot of that, funneling through individuals having conversations. And there's organizations like the Scientific Coalition for UAP, which just had their conference. And, they're trying to sort of organize and organize the data and organize studies and scientists to talk about it. But so much of this stuff just gets fed individual, to either website, or individual to YouTube, individual to more smaller groups. I guess Exo Metaverse is kind of trying to organize the conversation as well. So there are some groups that pop up.
I'm doing something on Exo Metaverse on Friday with Zinka. We're talking about the ET situation, but I want to just go to Elliot, who I think there is a purposeful avoidance of the alien topic, because in the mainstream, because they don't know how to talk about that. It sounds so science fiction to say there are aliens, and that's part of our cultural dilemma. We've been so programmed by science fiction movies that it's like, to say alien, it's like suddenly we're in some B-grade awful horror movie if we say the word alien. And that's been really in the way now. That's the giggle fact. It's like, aliens, when are they invading? And there's a whole mindset when as soon as you say aliens, that has nothing to do with reality. It only has to do with this commercial programming and, all the stupid things people have said and done in the name of aliens. So we have no clear conscience about who or what these beings are. So Elliot, help us here. Come on.
Sure.
Help us with.
So I think one of the main things about that, and one of the most interesting things about like the UFO and the aliens, when you really think about it, and why people are so hesitant, outside of the ridicule, outside of the media programming that you're talking about, is that there's nothing more, I guess I'm going to coin a word here, de-anthropocized. Like, we're totally anthropomorphic with everything we do. We got our sweet little Anthropocene going on right now. And what the alien does is it kind of just confronts you with, you know, something that's not you. And that's what's, I think, particularly what people have a hard time getting their mind around, and why we end up making all this sort of like kitschy, weird movies and books and people behaving bizarrely. Like, you know, hate to say it, but the Raelians, they're like not bad people, but they're funky people, the way they kind of swagger through the world. But that's what I think a big...
Yeah, no, go ahead, big, yeah. No, I just want to, go ahead, finish.
Yeah, so it's like, yeah, people will probably have, I mean, your average person who has no interest in this topic is going to be a little, you know, freaked out, because it's going to like destabilize their, you know, what a Lacanian would call their symbol set. Like, their whole symbol matrix is going to get completely eradicated, which means, you know, you'll have like a lot of neurosis and psychosis and things like that. And then there's just going to be like the cultural blowback from the public going like, all right, what's the secret history of the 20th century? Give it up, feed it up. Here we go. Yeah, you got to tell us everything now, because you just like let the cat out of the bag. But yeah, I think that, you know, your average person is going to be freaked out, but anyone who's been studying UFOs and alien abduction and contactee encounters and stuff like that, all we're going to do is have like our day in the sun and say, told you there was something to this. There was something to this. Right. I told you so.
Exactly. I'm telling people that, telling them so right now. But no, but academically, David, doesn't this have to relate what Elliot was just saying to the study of the other? Like, it was a big kind of philosophical movement, and talk about that, because people don't understand how this otherness, or I think it was done to explain racism and all that, is an aspect of the South. Can you talk about the other theory, the others theory, and all that French? I think it Levitas was the guy or somebody.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's how do you define something? You define something by what it is in some ways, and so a lot of times, you know, in our culture, that's what we see this other as that. You know, it's the us versus them is an easy way for everybody to think about it. You know, it's the other is the them, you know, and it often becomes the them that people attack or sort of see as the enemy. But, you know, it's a way for groups to organize themselves.
But yeah, define the other as it's classically been defined in academia. Do you know? In philosophy?
I'm not sure on the exact, on the exact definition of that. You know, I mean, I think that people can get a picture for it, you know, in terms of just thinking about the alien and that, you know.
Well, I think what I read about it is there's always an aspect of the self that you see in the other, you know, and although Elliot makes a good point about de-anthropomorphizing these things, not only because they look different, but because they don't have any emotional resonance with what we are always looking for in other human beings, like a little smile, a little look, there's something just so, and at least in some of the ones I think I've seen, there's just so bland. Don't you think, Henrietta? Isn't that the trauma?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about what you're talking about with the other. I mean, and what occurs to me is that these guys talking about it in the cultural framework, which Elliot always does, and Dave too, you know, is so important. But it occurs to me that, you know, we just don't understand who we are, right? We don't. So this is a kind of like Elliot said, you know, this jarring confrontation, you know, breakdown, everything shattering. It's that's the thing. But I'm excited that we're getting some more information about the whole picture, right? And it's not like right now, but there's a whole history of it. I mean, for ever since humans have existed, but this is coming in a different way. It's kind of, I like to frame it recently in terms of like shape shifting, you know, whether it's the UFO, the alien, the classic alien, or the owl, or the, you know, the strange creature. You know, I've seen a kind of creature that I didn't know what it was with my friend when I was a teenager. And we were always like, this is so freaky. How can we explain to people that we saw a pig dog? You know, it was neither dog nor pig. I sort of see.
You mean a shrine hunt? A shrine hunt?
No, it's like, it was a thing that was like, you know, a weird creature that we had no reference to. There was no reference.
Did you see
and we
that
weren't on drugs.
Did you see that?
Sorry?
Did you see that in England?
Yes, in the English woods.
Yeah, because that's I mean, I think that, I don't know the name of it, but that's a fairy lore creature.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't.
I'll have to look that up and find it for you. But that's actually known. That's actually a known thing in England, like, or at least
Yeah.
the UK. That's wild.
Yeah, you know, and then along the same lines there, yeah, it's, you know, it's just, I can't not, at this point with the UFO and the alien studies and things, I can't not but just think about like the higher strangeness stuff. Like, I mean, the best one, of course, Skinwalker Ranch. Yeah, Skinwalker Ranch is like one of the most, you know, it is like the UFO hotspot. And it's like, you don't just get UFOs there. You get like the bulletproof dog or the invisible voices that come down from above and mock you in a language that never existed before. And that's the weird thing, is that like how there seems to be no disconnect between UFOs and aliens and human psychology. They seem to just completely be intertwined with each other in such a way that you can't really have one without the other. Like, I don't think you can just look, like, for example, real easy example, my famous story is that when I saw a UFO, I was listening to Terrence McKenna on a podcast over the Hudson River talking about UFOs, and I just heard a voice go, "Hey," and I just stopped and looked up, and it was like just right there in a clear blue sky, and it was like, what, you know, there was no need for me to look up. I was like looking down into my iPod at the time, and just like, because I had a little video of Terrence McKenna. It was a video iPod. I thought it was so advanced at the time. But, you know, it was just like a hey, and you look up, and it's like, so that psychological factor, I think, is another reason why people are like gearing up. Because, I mean, just think about like how we do a Gregorian system with like Christ, before Christ and after Christ. And he is like an other. So like a divine other, but an other. And we just created a whole cultural system based on this, you know, encounter. So I kind of think that when the aliens kind of like, when we're all out in the open about it, culturally speaking, I wouldn't be surprised if it becomes after aliens, like the year 14 AA after the aliens. It will have that big of a cultural impact.
Yeah, I was, you know, I'm thinking about in terms of, Alan, what you were saying with the kind of emotionlessness. I'm thinking about Whitley Strieber's experiences, where it's so intimate with him, you know, and despite the fact that you know, the cover of Communion is sort of the iconic image of, you know, the alien as other, to him, you know, there's an intimate relationship, you know, particularly with that entity that's depicted. And he was recently on a panel with Jeffrey Kripal and Dennis McKenna and a couple other folks, and they were talking about animal consciousness. And Dennis McKenna had separated human consciousness from animal consciousness. And Whitley came back really strong, talking about how we don't understand what animal consciousness is. We don't even know what consciousness is, let alone to be saying human versus animal and that. And it seemed to me that his experience with, you know, the visitors has opened his mind to this, you know, wider sense of what consciousness is and what intimacy is, you know, especially after the Pine Ridge experience that you guys had.
Oh yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and it was interesting because there was actually a Lakota on the talk, on the panel, who recognized Whitley's experience. And I'm sorry I don't know his name, because I wasn't familiar with his work until I saw the panel, so I don't remember it offhand. But he recognized Whitley's experience and was able to speak to it from, you know, his own experience and the experience of First Nations. So
Yeah.
that was really interesting.
No, I think we have to accept people's experiences. I was just talking to Chris Bledsoe the other day. You know who Chris Bledsoe?
Yeah, I know Chris.
You know Chris? Do you know
Yeah.
him? Are you living near him? Are you living?
I'm south of him. I haven't had a chance to visit him, but I've been talking to him for a long time. He's
What an amazing guy he is. We should go down. There's some weird stuff, Elliot, that happens there, right?
Yeah, Alan, if you go, let me know. I'll make a trip up to North Carolina for that.
No, you're in touch with him. You let us know if we can come visit him. Maybe we can visit all of us, because it's stranger than Skinwalker, you know?
Well, and it's focused on his family. I mean, it's amazing. Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's focused on his family's having phenomena, but I just interviewed him yesterday as part of this panel for Contact in the Desert. And he was saying, this is beyond ETs, UFOs. This is mythic. There was this divine feminine form that came to him out of the body of a bull. This bull sort of was running at him. It ran him over, sort of. He looked up, and there was this woman of light that just appeared. And he's such a humble guy. He's such I mean, I liked him. He was he reminded me of Travis Walton. Very, you know, didn't have anything to do with any of this, and suddenly it's all around. Do you know him, Elliot? Do you know Chris Bledsoe?
No, but just going on like what David said earlier is about Strieber and his intimacy with them. Is I heard the same thing from Susie Hanson, who wrote an amazing book called The Dual Soul Connection, with Dr. Rudy Shield, of all people, being the editor. You know, and this guy is like a Harvard or astronomer or something like that. And she's talking about how during her abduction experiences, which were many, she said that she saw this bizarre blue ball of light and was told that this is going to be your future son, and that she had incredibly intimate and emotional experiences with these aliens, let's just call them. And then the other one is, of course, like my favorite guy who lives in Hoboken, actually probably not far from my new job at a bar, but David Huggins. David Huggins has had like the most far out experience of anyone I've ever heard in the UFO field, where, you know, he has like this alien wife that he's like fathered babies with, and the guy is so kind of like sober and like just straightforward, and his paintings are beautiful. Classically, you know, I think what it is that like sometimes the emotionlessness that's experienced actually has to do with probably like just the way they move, the profound terror that human beings experience in their presence, I think, and that they continue to approach. I think that can, you know, in the words of William Burroughs, you know, freeze the lymph in your gland. But otherwise, I've heard plenty of people say that they have like loving, you know, people describe them as my other family, you know, and that's like, so there is, and then like on top of all of this, they continue to be present and not present. And there's a kind of intimacy there, almost like with a, you know, with like a secret lover that you barely are conscious of their presence, but they're, you know, people say that like, no, they've been following me my whole life. They're like my family or something like that. So, I mean, that's something that's pretty hard to neglect, instead of just seeing like, you know, evil androids coming to steal our souls or something.
Well, You know, Elliot, that's what's interesting with the Bledsoe experience, was that the initial encounter, which was an abduction encounter on the Cape Fear River, was incredibly traumatizing. And from that, it spun out into, whereas now Chris is in regular contact with these kind of like plasma light orbs. There's a lot of footage, you know, if you Google it, you can see the videos that he's taken and some of the photos of these orb encounters that he has. And it's amazing because, I mean, it's become, you know, completely opposite to what it was, this incredibly traumatic, extreme abduction encounter with missing time. It involved his oldest son, and it really, you know, it pulled him out of the community. Because with that, you know, he was kind of, you know, going to church, Southern guy, and it totally knocked that. He, you know, he was cast out of that world. That was no longer available to him, and his family, you know, rejecting the fact that this had happened because it was so extreme. I mean, he had entity encounters. He had his friends. They were fishing, and they were actually chased by a UFO with his friends driving in that. You know, so it was multiple witnesses. But it led to, you know, instances like Grant Cameron was there when Chris's dog had like a hemorrhaging cut that Chris just went up and touched, and it was healed. Wow. And there was a tree on their property, not the property that they currently live at, but at the property that they were at during the initial encounters, where it just burst into flames, you know, just spontaneously burst into flames, and people would come and get healed there. You know, so there's these healings that are happening around Chris, and kind of visionary experiences that he's had with these entities and that. And you know, he's had a number of people out. A lot of different folks from various organizations were very interested in it, including John Alexander, who went out there and wrote about him in his book Reality Denied. So it's, you know, it's really interesting to see that. It's very similar to what you're describing, you know, this continuing presence that exists there, you know, and having talked to Chris over the years and talked to his son Ryan, you know, like Alan said, like they're really down to earth people, and yet the experience is so intense and so, you know, it's just like, wow, you know. And everybody who goes to the property, like, they'll see it. Like, I mean, that's one of the interesting things about his orb videos is, you know, if in a normal instance these things would be up on YouTube with somebody saying, oh my god, look what it is, you know, and these videos are just Chris like calmly like, okay, there it is, okay, we've got another one, you can see it there over the trees, because it's so regular. I mean, it's so, you know, common. And it's very similar to Dorothy Izat, who had there's a documentary, she was, I believe she was a Canadian experiencer, who Hynek had actually come and talked to, and she was getting a lot of footage of these kind of like lights and that. There's a good the documentary may be called Capturing the Light. It's on Amazon Prime, but it's real similar to some of the stuff that the Bledsoes encounter now. And Hynek actually told her, like, don't talk to people about this. Have your experiences, interact with the you know, with this phenomena, but don't go looking for scientists to prove it. Just, you know, enjoy what you have, because if you start pulling in scientists, they're not going to understand it. If you pull in the press is going to make fun of it, you know. So just have your experience with this thing and document it, so that later, once people start taking this seriously, they can come back and look at what you have, you know. And her family, and the documentary is really interesting because her family doesn't fully believe, despite the fact that she's got all these photos, she can, you know, kind of call it when it's going to happen. And there's one scene in the documentary where, as the documentary is being filmed, the family actually has an encounter with one of these lights. And so that you see them go, oh wow, like this thing that, you know, my mom and my grandma or my aunt or whatever has been talking about all these years, you know, like on film, you see that moment where they go, oh, this is real. Like, this is some, like, you know, she's not just crazy, you know, this is actually happening.
What that could be the moment the world is about to have, like, really, this is real. I mean, what do you think about? How does that change the collective psyche, Elliot, if that's our moment?
Well, I mean, what it's going to do is it's going to just, I mean, what I said is it's going to scramble our entire symbol system, which is basically what we use to navigate reality, via culture, language, thought, etc. And, well, it's going to show us that, that reality itself is far stranger than Newton could ever imagine, and that guy was into the occult, for God's sakes. But, that's it. It's really sort of like living in a house your entire life and then finding out that you can actually leave it and that there's a whole neighborhood of other houses with other families doing other shit. So there's no way to actually totally predict it outside of what you would see in just normal psychoanalytic theory. So in normal psychoanalytic theory, you have a trauma and that disrupts your symbol set and makes you neurotic or compulsive or something like that, or delusional even. And that's really what's in store for our whole culture, which is, probably a good thing, because the only thing that's really been disrupting our culture is at this point technology. It's basically technology and geopolitics are sort of what changed the game for human beings. But otherwise it's oh, look, I've got Apple on my wrist now, and people are horrified that I'm going to get a chip in the vaccine or something like that. So that's the only thing that really has disrupted our culture is, people on the phone all the time now and that kind of stuff. But this is, leaving your house, or really being forced out of your house, which makes sense because, as Greta says, the house is on fire. So this is, I think I'm actually super excited, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. But I'm also David and I met on a talk about tricksters, and I gave a talk about tricksters now from it. So that kind of chaotic, destabilizing energy, I enjoy. I'm a bit of an anarchist, if you couldn't tell. So I actually kind of see it as sort of our entire anthropic vision is going to burst. And what I'm really interested in is what's going to happen when we start forget their technology. Of course, their technology is going to do something extraordinary for us if they let us play with it. But there's this great movie called Arrival, and it's about a linguist who encounters these aliens. And as she learns their language, her entire mind changes so much so that she can now see the future because the language that they have has altered her mind. I'm really curious about because we hear instances of telepathy constantly in this literature. I don't think they almost never speak really. And so that to me is probably what we're going to is going to destabilize us the most, and I think probably be the most valuable, because you got Lacan saying something like the unconscious is constructed like a language. Well, what if we get a new alien language out of this, and it completely changes the way our consciousness processes reality and processes the symbols that we have?
Yes, that is the most interesting thing. I really want to have a real intellectual discussion about that very point that you made there, Elliot. This does change our inner workings and perceptions in ways that no one is even talking about, and they're not capable of talking about. I mean, the only academics are capable of talking about that, but they're not talking about it because they're holding it off at arm's length. So we as intelligent people need to talk about that. And of course, the movie was great. I never thought about it in that terms. Wait, Henrietta, you're a language person. What do you think about that?
I really, everything that Elliot just said, is exactly what I think is, that's how I feel about it too. How we whatever we are interface with whatever that is, it seems that that could change. You know, Alan, that McKenna, I just pulled it up with respect to what Elliot was saying. Our destiny is to become what we think, to have our thoughts become our bodies and our bodies become our thoughts. That kind of idea of like everything is just going to be, it's just going to be different.
Yeah, that's why I was
mean,
like, after Alien, it's going to be like after
right?
Alien year 1, year 2, year 3, because it's just
Exactly.
there is a book on this that it's the only one I'm really aware of by Slattery is her name. She wrote a book called Xenolinguistics, and it opens up with her relationship with Alison Gray, because Alison Gray was on this like transformative acid trip and like downloaded a whole new symbol set of a language that I think she's like, I don't know the meaning of it, but I'm compulsively making this all the time. So Gray is friends with Slattery, and her whole book is about a language that she downloaded made of just a few symbols, but you kind of move them around and they kind of mean different things. And so, I mean, and that's the thing is that like, I've heard, I can't remember the name of the guy, but he was, he's a famous contactee too. I think his name is John something, where he was told to like outline symbols, and they were kind of like a hybrid version of the alien written language. Cause you know, their craft is always covered in like bizarre pictograms, hieroglyphics and shapes and platonic forms and stuff. And it was kind of a melding of English at the same time to create a kind of hybrid consciousness and a hybrid language. And in fact, there's a wonderful talk on YouTube. It's from the UK, and it's by another scholar. And her whole talk is about the intersection between an alien language and a human language. And it's all about like the hybridization of consciousness that will occur. Because the thing is that like meeting an alien and shaking its hand and something like that, it's like, well, that's going to be important for sure. But once their culture, and the thing is that their culture is already intertwined with our culture. I think that's why they keep themselves at a distance, but they keep on displaying themselves, but it's always on their terms. So in fact, why don't you guys take it and I'll pull up a line from Slattery's book that I think is very appropriate.
Yeah, this is really great, Elliot. I really think these is the sort of discussion that I love having, and we need to have, and nobody is approaching it from this level. So I mean, at least I haven't heard it. Have you, David? What do you think of that?
No, I think that, I mean, I think this is the conversation that needs to happen, right? I think that this is where it's reaching that level. I think, you know, what's interesting about talking about this, the alien language thing, Kim Black, right? He was talking about Kim Edward Black.
Last week. Yeah, right. Yeah.
He was talking about the hieroglyphics being symbols that seemed simplistic, but it was because they had multidimensional meanings within the letters themselves. You know, and so this idea of sort of the telepathy and the I'm going to say time travel, but not really. I mean, like multidimensionality and ability to exist in the past, future, and present all at the same time. You know, kind of to flow through the glass block universe.
Well, you know what's interesting about what you said, existing in past, present, and future at the same time, is like we have words, we have verbs that exist in the past, present, and future. And if our consciousness is shifted, so that's like emerging, our language has to shift, and we don't have a language for saying something's past, present, and future all at the same time. And so this is, I think maybe is where Elliot's going with this, is the hybridization of language in terms of, and what Henrietta said, in terms of who we really are. We exist in the past, present, and future. And so this is the AA sort of movement we're moving into. Henrietta.
I think that I do think that like so we're having this conversation now, but I mean, I have experienced in the last couple of years, just like bumping into people who have had these extraordinary experiences with lights, craft, visitors, you know, hieroglyphic, holographic universes in the corner of their room, just real, straightforward, regular people who, you know, if you open that door and then you hear these stories, it's like, so it's probably happening a lot more than we're all collectively conscious of, is what I am thinking, right? Because it keeps happening to me that I'm encountering people who have had experiences, and that, look, you know, you guys are great talkers, you know, you can use language really well, you know, David and Elliot and Alan, but I'm just thinking, you know, there's a lot of people who I meet who can't really express it. And it's really interesting. It's like, I just kind of get it, what they're talking about. I mean, you know, it's already working without language, right? You sort of understand. And that's what happened to me when I read Communion, Strieber's book. I knew what he was talking about in a way that I didn't understand how I knew it. And then I, like David said, I kind of went into this like wormhole, you know, where my dreams were confused with memory, and I just didn't know what was going on. But it felt like something, I just knew what he was talking about. And I feel like a lot of people have that experience, but they're not out in the public speaking about it. They're just having conversations on the street corner.
Living in,
you know?
rural Georgia, it's been interesting to see, you know, in terms of that, it's sort of in a different way. But well, one, yeah, I mean, I was at a local gas station where they were having a pickin' and grinnin', just like local musicians coming. And I spoke with a guy there who had encounters when he was in the Navy, and he started telling me about these experiences. And you know, he told me, because I apologized to him, because he had friended me on Facebook because I was helping him organize this just local musicians at a gas station kind of thing. And I was a little bit nervous. I was like, you know, like I write about things that are a little bit out there and stuff. And he was like, oh, no, I get that. But yeah, I had this experience when I was in the Navy, and went on to tell me about like this incredibly intense underwater UFO that he had witnessed while he was, you know, stationed in the Caribbean, or the Gulf. And it was amazing to hear that, because you'd never think, I mean, if you would just come into this gas station in rural Georgia with people playing music, you would not think that like, oh, here's a guy, you know, that had this, that changed his life. I mean, it completely changed his life and his view of reality. And he started asking me about like the Book of Enoch and all these really obscure stuff. And I'm like, where did you hear this? And he was like, oh, I'm really interested in it. And it was because of this experience that he'd had. You know, and I found that, you know, there's an antique shop by here where a lot of people go through, and so many people have had experiences, and it always alters them, you know. But again, rural Georgia, you don't think that, you know. And with this language question, actually had come up in that panel I was talking about with Whitley, and the fellow's name was Tiokasin Ghost Horse.
Oh yeah, he has a program on BAI. I know him. He's a Native American.
Yeah, he's
person.
Lakota, yeah. And he was talking about the Lakota language and how hard it is to translate any of these concepts into English, whereas in Lakota, if you're speaking Lakota, this is already here, right? Like the idea that we exist within this timeless state, that we exist, you know, that there's none of this like I, me, I own it, I have this thing that it's not a thing language, right? It's not like an ownership. It's a language of relationships and experiences. And so it's really interesting to me that Whitley went to the Pine Ridge and had this experience, which furthered his, you know, one of the things that's great about Whitley is that his entire life is the lived journey of a person going through this encounter with the other and learn to understand the other, and to come to have this conversation with the other. And it's always changing, you know, and it's always and always maturing and always opening up further and further into this relationship. You know, so he's an interesting person to think of as humanity goes through this, right? Like what
he's the best. I think he's the most expert explorer of the field, and he is always going through something, which has been why people have criticized him, because it's something else and something else. But maybe he's just going deeper and deeper into this depth, this deep dive. So this
He's like an occult knot. He's not even a psychonaut. He's an occult knot.
Yeah.
it's not even a cult. I mean, I think when
just
people
secret,
say,
just secret. I mean,
But
whenever I
it's-
use the word occult, I just mean hidden, secret.
but I think we need new words, right? It's
Agreed.
not even a cult. And I just also want to say this a hybridization idea of consciousness and of language is what I'm going to be talking to with Zinka about on Friday in her exo metaverse, because the theme is hybrids. But we're talking about ET human hybrids, but it's more the fear is this hybridization of consciousness. It goes back to what Timothy Leary used to say about LSD. It was illegal because the people in control don't want people thinking differently.
Right.
So if you take this substance, you're not thinking the way you're supposed to be thinking, and that's why it's been outlawed. I mean, as we go through this other thing of a shift of language and consciousness, we are not thinking the way the other people. So what did you find, Elliot? What's the book?
Right. So it's called Xenolinguistics. It's written by Slattery, and there's just two little excerpts I'd like to give you. Here's just one of my own notes about her. She draws a connection between the ineffable, as William James described, indescribable mystical experiences and high doses of psychedelics, along with the idea of coming in contact with a language not of this earth. So the ineffableness there, and this is a quote from her. This is important because I think this is basically what we're talking about, and this is saying it very well. Natural language cannot, by definition, address the unspeakable, but the unspeakable can address us as linguistic creatures on its own terms, at its own behest, with its own timing, and utilizing its own symbolic systems. And I think that's what we're talking about when we talk about alien language. That's what her whole book is about.
Well, I wonder what Chomsky would think about that, because he's probably no, really, because he is the best philosopher of language, and he's finding what I think, I don't know that much about, some organic consciousness structure which forms language. I think it's an aspect of who we are. But as we meet these other consciousnesses, maybe whatever language is wholly directed with new intentions, like Lakota people. So
yeah, in fact, just jumping on that. The thing is, it's like, for example, there's another great book called Through the Language Glass, where people by a guy named Deutsch or something, it's very good. And it's just about how you can show, he does this famous thing where he looks at, like, I think it's the Epic of Gilgamesh, and they describe the sea during the day as not being blue, but being like burgundy red. And he started, there was these experiments done where they would show native people different colors, and they could point out the colors, but they didn't have words for them. Like, they would have one word for like a whole variety of colors. And, you know, you go into your local paint store and you got like a million names for colors that are like, you know, pale ice. And it's like, how many different ways can you say the word white? So,
well, that's what they say of the ancient Greeks. There was no word for blue. It was a very recent development. Blue was green. And so distinctions is what makes language. And with the more, and distinctions also create experiences. If we don't have a distinction of even like a UFO encounter, there's no frame of reality to put that in. And
I've got a little bit more, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. One kind of interesting aside is that Susan Hanson said something like they were always communicating with her telepathically, except when she did something that they really wanted her to do, like some sort of psychic like exercise or something, and she did it well. and they would just open their mouths a little bit, and this weird clicking sound would happen. I think clicking and encounters have been mentioned before, and so so there's that idea. But then what I think is, now that we're going off on this tear, is that probably my guess is that when the alien and the human language finally come in like real contact with each other, like making contact right here, what's going to happen is that like we're going to have an understanding of language that we've never had before, that you only get through like poets, glossolalia, you know, and then famously how Grant Cameron's book about getting these bizarre songs downloaded into these famous musicians, and now we're singing alien music, rock and roll music, supposedly. And but yeah, that's it. That's where I wanted to go with that. Is that I think they're gonna, when we really get there, I think they're gonna show us that like you've been using language, but you have no idea what it can be used for and what it actually is.
Right. Well, you know, Laird Scranton, when he was looking at the Dogons, right? You study him, right, David?
Sure.
He was saying words need to be a cluster of meaning, not like a collapse of the wave function saying this word means that. But with the Dogons, there's many levels of meaning. And I think I said this before. It's like sort of how the emojis are now substituting for language, and their meanings are less specific but more impactful because they are less specific, you know, like, yeah, go ahead, David. Yeah,
I was just gonna real quick before we get off Laird, because Laird had that really interesting point about the similarity between experiencer encounters and the hieroglyphic meaning of what they had encountered. He told I think it was one of his conversations with you, Alan, where he was talking about an experiencer who had encountered some entities that they were running off, and then they turned into a deer, and that hieroglyphic for deer meant to run away.
yeah.
Whitley's,
Wow.
in Whitley's book, A New Reality, he had similar material that he's looking at from the cabin experiences, where you know, they would the visitors would have like a hawk head or something and be, you know, and it was something, you know, Puharich and Geller had similar stuff. So this idea of this language as almost like an embodied thing, right? Like in this way that they themselves become the hieroglyphic, you know, is really
Right. Well, someone asked online, they said, would this be related to light language? And light language is indecipherable. I mean, there's intention and expression, but what people are doing, there's no in, because there's no consciousness attached to it, in a sense, if you know what I mean.
I don't know what light language is.
Oh, tell.
It's light language is you know, it's almost like glossolalia, so it's almost like speaking in tongues, but it's a, you know, the idea of kind of channeling pure reality through the language. And so the light language exists kind of in a tier, not tiered, but layered, like multi-dimensionality, so that when you hear it, right, like you're hearing like pure meaning, pure feeling, pure thought, pure expression of that idea, you know. There's some, I forget, I don't know any particular names of folks, but I'll send you links. You can listen to. It's very musical. It's like glossolalia. You know, I guess it would be a form of glossolalia, since that's a technical term. I mean, it's kind of like speaking in tongues, right? But it's not like the Pentecostal speaking in tongues is its own kind of thing. So,
yeah,
but it's a similar idea.
But like even related to this, and this is like perfect to look at, because just look at like the language that human beings have surrounding, you know, UFOs and aliens. Like we don't even have good words. Everyone just likes the ring of the word UFO. We just like how that sounds. And then before that, you know, you had airships, and then now you have UAPs. And then you have extraterrestrial, you have cryptoterrestrial. So, I mean, trying to get a handle on it, it's like, you know, Mercury. So it's like you can't even, we can't even talk about it. And it goes right back to that ineffable, like William James comment.
Well, and that's an interesting point with the terminology too, because if you think about it, UFO and UAP are both military terms. They were both terms that were put on by, you know, the military, or scientific terms, right? Extraterrestrial, like that's a scientific term, you know. And so we have science and we have the military defining how we see these things, right? And then the popular term before that was was flying saucers, which was a media term. It was a journalist had basically misquoted Kenneth Arnold and called the thing flying saucer when the idea was that Kenneth Arnold had seen kind of wedge-shaped things that were skipping like saucers. And then, you know, before that we had ghost rockets.
Right.
We had Foo Fighters, which is a term that came out of a comic that was popular during World War II. So when they were encountering these things, the Foo Fighter term stuck, you know, and so that was military slang. And then, you know, there's other things like in 1946, and this is something that like obsessively bring up just because I think it's so interesting. Everybody thinks about, you know, the idea of the UFOs starting in 1947 with Kenneth Arnold sighting, but in 1946, there was a well-publicized sighting in California of what was called the Corrida. And that was, you know, kind of like the predated Kenneth Arnold, and it was in the newspapers. It was written up in the San Diego newspapers, and it was tied to Meade Lane and Mark Probert and this kind of channeled communication with this thing. But it had actually blocked out the moon, you know, so that's why it became like noted. And it was closer to the airship idea. It was the psychic communications that Mark Probert had said he got from it. It was built out of balsa wood, right?
Wow.
Like this interstellar craft made of balsa wood that blocked out the moon called the Corrida. You know, and it's interesting if you go back into the history of the language that's used, because you know, Vimana, which is the Vedic term that gets put on UFOs quite often, was really popular in the 50s. So you'll find a lot of 50s you know, material on flying saucers, and Vimana like sits right next to it, but no one ever uses that term now. I mean, it starts to come back because of, you know, digital communications, and that people looking into the idea of ancient aliens talks about the Vimana and that, but it's not a term that's kind of used colloquially. But in the 50s it was, because, you know, you had Desmond Leslie and Adamski writing about this and using the term Vimana because of the theosophical influences. But it's, you know, it's interesting because we don't have a stable term. And I think that's also because we don't have a term that they gave us, right? Like we don't have a term that the visitors or that, you know, the UFO phenomena itself has given us, because that's what its name would be, you know, in the same way that like, you know, I mean, the idea of calling First Nations people Indians, right? Like that never had anything to do. That was totally a colonialist put on to those people, you know. And yet when we hear the actual tribal groups names or their familial names and that kind of thing, you know, that's an actual name, you know. And so what does the UFO phenomena say it's called? You know, I think that would be an interesting question, is like, what is it saying? Because everything that we have are these terms that we put on it, you know, unidentified flying object, right? Like unidentified aerial phenomena. Like these are clinical weird terms that have nothing to do, and they don't have anything to do with the experience either. You know, I mean, because the people have these experiences that go into such depth, and then to call that like a UFO, you know, I mean, that doesn't make sense. Like that's not what's going on there, you know. It's just not. So what, you know, that would be an interesting thing with folks who do CE5, is like, what do these things call themselves, right? Like, or CE6 with like Mark Sims, like get that communication back of like, what is the name for this thing that we're encountering? And I would, you know, I think that it's probably multiple things, and there's such a diversity of encounter stories and experiences, I would think that we're not just encountering one thing, you know.
Yeah, I would completely agree that there's the evidence of it being like one group, I think, is not really true. They seem to be more like a class, and they seem to have their own kind of classes and stuff. And then you know, it's just like it just gets so like wild. I mean, maybe honestly, here you go. Oh, this is a wild idea. This could be like the gestation, like what we're going through right now, where it's like we're going to reveal ourselves like semi-incognito, but just enough to get them talking, just enough to get them talking and thinking. And, you know, and here we are doing it, going like, we see these things, we don't even know what to call them because they won't tell us what to call them. And so that could be like the little, like, you know, just trying to get your motor running, like just trying to get your motor running. And that's going to lead to eventually them probably coming out and being like, all right, this is how you guys talk. This is how you talk. This is how you talk to us. And this is how we speak. So, yeah, I mean, just going on that, on this tear we've been going on, maybe this is just part of that consciousness process. It's like, we're going to show you something so ineffable and so other that your language is going to have to break down and also become like more creative. And, you know, I think even Terence McKenna once famously said that I think the UFO is built out of language, just like consciousness is built out of language. So, yeah, those are, I mean, yeah, that's what I was just thinking right here, is that like our language is already breaking down thanks to their, you know, presence and absence. It's like that wonderful combination of, you know, there's a romantic line I came up with long ago, which is something like, I don't know what's more powerful, your presence or your absence. And that applies directly to the other.
Yeah, yeah, because it is so present, you know. And it's interesting too, because like the presence now, right, is an absence, because the stuff we're seeing in the media is not it. You know, I mean, that's not the actual encounter. Like that's not that, it's, you know, and even the footage, there's a Marco Acevedo, who's he's a graphic designer up in Evanston, who talks in some of the groups, and he did a great kind of photo collage of UFOs yesterday and UFOs today. And yesterday it was all these brilliant, you know, colorful images and illustrations, and you know, this kind of very visionary art that came out of, you know, the 40s through the 80s, really. And then UFOs today was just gray blocks, right? Because it's all the stuff we see with the Tic Tac stuff. And so, you know, this complete lack of creativity and lack of visionary quality to what we're seeing in the media, tied to this phenomena that in the past has caused, you know, people to grow and to learn new language and to have these new things. Whereas now what we're seeing in the media as this massive UFO push are just these gray squares, you know, of nothing, you know, of a blob, like a black blob in a gray square. You know? That's an absence, right? Like that's not the event. That's not what Whitley experiences, right? Like that's not what the Bledsoes experience. And the weird thing is that the Bledsoes, you know, are out there, right? Like they post videos of their experiences of the orbs and that kind of thing. But when people see that, they're like, oh no, that can't be real, right? I mean, even if when you look at the video, like it's not fake, right? Like you can see the texture of the orb, you know, it's not a dust mote. You can actually see this thing, and that, you know, and talk, and again, like, and if you talk to Chris or Ryan or anything, like, you know, that they're not, yeah, I mean, they're too normal, right? Like they're people. They have lives. They live their lives. You know, they're not out there mediating this thing in the way that you would expect someone to do if it was a total hoax, you know, but people aren't happy with that. You know, they don't want that. But then this black blob that the military says was a thing, people get all excited about, and then we get New York Times stories about it, and we get all this stuff. And it's just really interesting to me, because this idea of presence and absence, right? Like, what we have now in the mediation is an absence of substance, I mean, of the actual UFO itself.
I think, David, that might be all some people can handle is the blob. The other stuff, the real stuff, the substantive stuff, it's too much for people who don't have substantive lives. I mean, maybe I'm just guessing.
No, but as soon as you encounter something like this, I mean, in my experience, I'm just talking from experience and from listening to other people, like David says, just normal people, it changes you. And this is what the part of the phenomenon, and Elliot, can I tell the little story about you and me?
Oh yeah, by all means.
I mean, one of our friendship, I mean, it's something, it's just interesting that, Elliot and I were, immediately drawn to each other, but then when we then reconnected after meeting at an event in New York City, and he came to my apartment, he walked into my apartment and collapsed on the floor and was sort of wailing, going, oh my God, because he'd just seen a UFO coming over the George Washington Bridge. And that was kind of like,
oh,
so I don't know. That's a right? Yeah, what a memory.
Yeah, that was you kind of scrambled
but
up
I mean,
there.
But it sounds corny, but it's not to these things. Yeah, again.
Yeah,
but, I wanted to kind of into a bit of the personal experience of each of you, just a tiny bit.
Sure.
If you've had them, because I know, this is where Elliot.
Yeah, and unfortunately, H, you're breaking up a little bit there. Oh no, too bad.
You're breaking up.
Yeah.
Henrietta.
And then I suddenly fall into it, like totally by accident, not because
we are talking about language, I guess, aren't we?
That's what I was thinking. There is a
go and then come back.
All right, cool. There is another story that's related to this. Is that I got into UFO summoning.
Hey, sorry.
Oh boy. Anyway, this is a fun story that I think you'll really like, David. Is I saw let me see, what was it? I went out. A friend of mine. They had just done the not the Disclosure Project, but the Citizens for Disclosure thing. Did you see that at Washington? It's like 30 hours of material.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, a friend of mine and I watched the entire thing like back to back, like 3 or 4 times. And after watching this, I was like, are you familiar with UFO summoning? And he was like, no, what's that? And I was like, well, supposedly you can summon UFOs. You want to go try and do it? He was like, yeah, how do we do that? And I was like, well, I think first we have to do something out of the ordinary. We have to do something that we normally don't do. What do you want to do? And he says, let's go to Bear Mountain. And I'm like, oh, great, that's cool. It's like a 45-minute drive. It's really beautiful. So we go there and we're walking around and I'm like, all right, I got an idea. Let's just take a stick and draw some draw a UFO and some people seeing it in this like mud beside a river. You just put like a big circle on it and did some like little chaos magic witchy shit, And then we went out into this field where everyone was hanging out and we waited for about an hour and nothing happened. So then we drove back to his apartment, right? And watched some, I don't know, Doctor Who or something. And I got bored and I left and I started walking home. And this is right in my little town of Leonia. And I start walking home and I look up to the sun and boom, I see this like classic disc blimp thing just cruising for a second. And there seemed to be, the communication seemed to be something like, we'll show up, but we're really only going to do it on our terms, and we're not going to do it in a field filled with families and shit just so you can get your jollies. But, you know, here we are. And then it just evaporated, like nothing was even there. And I was just like, damn. And then the last UFO I saw was when I was working on the Set Science Free project, where we were trying to get Rupert Sheldrake, and we're confronting Ted, and we got 250 like PhDs and MDs and a Nobel Prize winner to say like, no, you got to put this online. This guy's talking, he's cool, man. And while me and the guy who were working on it, we're talking strategy, I'm on the balcony of his like Brooklyn or Queens apartment, and he says, maybe we can get like Freemasons involved. Like Freemasons are into this kind of stuff, and you know they're into the mind and everything. Maybe there's some like you know well-connected dudes there that can you know pass it around. And just as he said that, there was this like silver ball floating across Brooklyn, and I said I forgot his name, but I was like, dude, get out here! There's a UFO, and he was like so pumped about like what he was doing that he was like, I really can't handle that right now. I'm already like doing like ESP protest against Ted. I just can't handle it right now. And I was like, no, dude, look, the second you said Freemason, like, like an orc showed up, and he was like, no, I can't handle that. That was cool.
Well, that's interesting that there was the idea of like why, you know, when people have these encounters, they don't always even, you know, they don't take pictures a lot of times. They don't think to take a picture. Sometimes they have weird responses where they're like, I didn't want to take a picture, you know, I didn't feel like I should take a picture. And that, you know, so it's interesting to hear that, you know, this experience where he's just like, no, I got too much on my mind. I don't need that added to it. You know, like you don't need the extra UFO there. Cause that is so natural, you know, just to have that kind of response. But also I think going back to this idea of what happens when society becomes integrated with this, you know, into the fact that individuals so often have that response where they're just like, kind of got to shut that off, you know. And that's even, you know, in some ways kind of the traumatic amnesia of, you know, abduction experiences, you know, or really close encounters where they can't remember everything, you know, or sometimes at all until it gets sort of like brought forward later, you know.
Yeah, and in fact, when I saw the one on the Hudson River, I like looked at it, and I actually did everything I could to not look at it, and just kept on my commute, and looked at it, and it's still there, kept on walking, it's still there. And same thing, there was plenty of people walking down the street, and I was too horrified and embarrassed to even grab someone and say like, look, do you see that? Do you see what I'm seeing? Like it felt like, even though it was in a totally public thoroughfare, you know, the George Washington Bridge, plenty of people everywhere. For some reason, it felt like oddly personal and very much like I'm finally seeing it. I don't want to look. I'm seeing it, and I really don't want to look. But yeah, same thing.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and because it does have that, you know, I've realized, as you know, I mean, I've been publicly writing about this stuff since like 2009 and doing researches and having my own experiences in that, and every day it's interesting to kind of have to like wrestle my mind to look at it, you know, and to remember experiences that I've had, right, and actually engage with those, and to not just kind of look away from them and go back to the everyday and like, you know, the normal kind of mundane stuff, but to actually like recognize that, you know. And Alan, actually, that it was interesting, you know, I had talked about this before with you, the 2 interviews that you did on Whitley's podcast, and hear the difference as you have kind of opened to your
I yes,
matured in your experience, you know.
Yeah. I just want to go back to what you said about the idea of these gray objects as opposed to like the deep emotional content that Chris Bledsoe and Whitley Strieber have. There's like those two different views we're getting of the whole UFO ET. We're getting the military version, black and white blobs on a gray screen, and they're getting the other thing from insiders that are giving us a whole other experience. And there's like mainstream is just the blobs, they're not getting the richness and the possibility that we're trying to talk about here. And no wonder they're afraid. And if we could, and I think this is why I like having these conversations, if we could turn the narrative to experiences like Chris Bledsoe and Whitley Strieber, there's a depth there that is more nourishing to the expansion of consciousness than blob technologies. So, and what Elliot is saying about language is so important and such a key factor in the impact of this otherworldly culture. It's not even a otherworldly presence. And obviously they're thinking beings, and obviously they're not thinking the way we're thinking. I mean, I often think of dolphins who, we say one sound at a time, but dolphins can emit 4 sounds at once through their blowhole, through their nostrils, through their throat, and through their mouth. So they are in a multi-dimensional language scape, and their brains are more sophisticated than humans, and they're probably more intelligent than humans. So we should actually study their language if we want to understand like alien and technology, because actually that I think is the other part. Their language is connected to their technology. We're never going to understand their technology until we understand their language. So there's that relationship that isn't even being mentioned by the media or the military, because they're so freaked out, like, oh my God, now they know. It's like, it's the Adam and Eve story where they ate of the tree of knowledge and now they know the truth. There's that mythic, it is kind of mythic times we're in, right? It's like now people know what we've been keeping secret, and like their power is being drained from like the Wicked Witch of the West. The power is being drained because we have the ruby slippers, and there's all these mythic overlays of this giant that we've been facing, this giant of the military industrial complex, and they're in control, and it's true, they make wars and they develop technology, and they've given us the internet on one good side of that. So it's like, but it's mythic. Always it's mythic, I guess. And, but now like this new thing is thrown into the mix that we don't understand. I mean, Terence McKenna said, he borrowed it from that Bell theorem guy, the physicist. He said, the universe is not only stranger than we imagine, it's stranger than we can imagine. So that's really what we're up against.
Yeah. And what I'm actually really looking forward to is that it's not, as far as my understanding is, it's not just going to be a paper released to Congress. Apparently, I think someone from the Pentagon is actually going to be on the congressional floor talking about this. So talk about watching a language meltdown happen in real time. You're going to have all these like senators and congressmen being like, well, what do we call this thing? And then, the Pentagon's going to go like, well, we've got acronyms, and stuff like that. But that's probably, to me, that's a super important event. It's just the Pentagon coming forward to, a democratic, representative body, which is all about language, and say like, now you guys have to talk about this stuff. And they're all just going to be looking left and right, and they're going to just be like, some of them will just be like, is it a threat? No. Okay, well then maybe I'm not going to pay attention to it. I can't wait to see what Alexandria Cortez says about this thing. It's going to be hilarious, whatever she comes.
Yeah, she is great. I love her. I don't know if she's,
Bernie.
I mean, it's sort of like what some politicians and even like other people say, well, we have to take care of our problems here. Why before? I think Bernie Sanders even said that when someone asked him about the UFO question. He said, well, we have enough problems right here on planet Earth. You know?
I'm kind of with him on that. I am being trapped in America. I'm kind of, I can see that angle. I can definitely appreciate that angle.
I appreciate the angle that more stimuli is coming into our reality, which will actually facilitate us from in looking at those problems in a different way. So I think this is why we need academics or linguists and everything we on this Senate floor. What's that, David? What did you say?
It's interesting with the question of academics because Jeffrey Kripal is at Rice, and he co-wrote Supernatural with Whitley.
Yeah.
Has written Whitley into academia, and has really sophisticated approaches to this. And there's other Diana, Walsh, Pasulka. There's a number of academics who have kind of come in, to sort of look at this topic. But what they're finding is that, in the same way that culture and language have to change to sort of tackle it, academia itself is going to have to change in terms of how it approaches these things. And it's really interesting because, there's the tools, like the tools of science, right? Like obviously science and the empirical method and all that can get you so far. But then there's a subjective element to it, which all of academia and research and science are incredibly uncomfortable with and always have been,
Right. And they're always 10 or 20 years behind the time, academia, So, but people like who we've had on, what was his name? The writer, what was his name? The other guy from a couple of weeks ago.
Mike.
Yeah, Grosso, Mike Grosso. He's like an academic who's really open to, who is pushing the envelope. But I also want to bring in Elliot's association. Maybe we'll have him, Tom Campbell, the physicist.
Yeah.
Let's talk about his approach to this and what he might say.
Yes.
Well, I've heard him bring it up every once in a while, and he's a physicist from NASA and everything, and he was a pioneer at the Bob Monroe Institute for doing out of body. And he's like an expert remote viewer, out of body guy, like can heal, like do all this kind of like, sort of psi stuff. And it's kind of funny. We have like psi day when he does his workshops. I always call them witchcraft day because it's like, you can talk to the dead. It's just a database, talk to the database. But he's very much like, I don't know, maybe. And I actually do have, going in from the Campbell model, which is the universe as a virtual reality. It's not created by some computer. It's created by consciousness. Consciousness is the computer, and consciousness creates this VR game so it can grow itself. That's it. So it's not like Bostrom, where you have the ancestor simulation. Instead, it's like consciousness creates this game for you to evolve itself. And that there is no physical reality. It's just a data in a computer. But I don't know what he would say exactly, but I do know if I take Campbell's model, which I'm really familiar with, I've been studying it since 2007 and writing about it, and it's in my books as well, in my essays and stuff. But I think one way you could read the UFO and the alien encounter is that it's actually like, in a video game, it's called a non-playable character. So it's every other character other than you. And I was thinking, like, maybe they're not conscious at all. Maybe they're not even real. Maybe it's like the video game throwing some bizarre novelty into your life to spur on your evolution. So like if your system becomes static and you do the same thing all the time and you have the same belief systems and whatnot, let's just throw a UFO at them. And now their whole world is opened up again. They have to come up with all these new symbols and ideas. So I have played with, and then also like even the CE5 material where they're like, sit here, use your mind, or CE6, it's like, use your mind and it'll show up, or something will show up. And it's like, couldn't that just be you interfacing with the computer saying like, I want to have a weird experience. And if you try hard enough, or you do strange stuff like magic and witchcraft, or I'll do a little ritual because I really want to see this, I really want to experience this, and then boom, it happens. So sometimes I do consider the possibility that like what we're actually seeing is not a real entity, but is it's a display to just shake up our human consciousness and to get towards where they seem to be in terms of their culture, their society, their technology. So it's like it gives you a future version of yourself, or a version of yourself from like another dimension or something, but just as a VR effect, just as an effect. Because I was always thinking like, are these guys so psychic that I can sit in the field and like an orb will show up? Or the same thing with other paranormal phenomenon, like a haunted house or an abandoned building. You go to this liminal place and you're like, I really want to see poltergeist activity. And you get it on film. There's a great channel called Nuke's Top 5 on YouTube that's just nothing but poltergeist activity. And it's shot in such a way that some of them are almost impossible to explain. And I'm thinking that like, that's what I think, there's a possibility that the paranormal phenomenon is the VR system giving you bizarre stuff because you're asking for it. I mean, why does magic work? Like magic works because you ask for it and it keeps you engaged in the game. So it'll give you a little bit of what you want, but just enough, just so it stays liminal, just so it doesn't take over the world, but just enough to keep you coming back for more.
But you know, that implies that we are paranormal beings, that we are liminal consciousnesses. We just don't know it until we sort of become desperate for that sort of magic where we tap into that other aspect of ourselves.
I always thought that reality itself and consciousness itself are purely paranormal phenomena. There's like nothing normal about the apparent scale of the universe, and there's nothing normal about being an agent in it.
Right.
It's weird.
Yeah. Henrietta, you were muted. I think you were saying something. You were muted. You're still muted. Do you want to unmute? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes.
Hang on. I've moved. I've had to switch to the phone device. It's better this way. I mean, the display, I love that idea. I mean, that's kind of like my sense of it too, is that it could very well be, and with Dave about this, you know, what's the factor, the evolutionary factor for us, right? It doesn't have to, like you say, be another like that, your symbols thing. It could just be, you know, if it's a new symbol, that in itself, right, can take you somewhere.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. A new symbol can take you somewhere.
Forward, however you want to frame it.
Right, but then like just take a look at like. Well, just take a look at like any religion.
What were you gonna say?
Sure. Just take a look at any religion. Any religion is like something remarkable happens, something impossible happens, and then an entire civilization, an entire society is built around this paranormal encounter, right?
Right.
So you see an angel, or you see Christ, or you see a dragon, or you see whatever, and it forwards like culture, it forwards speech, it just evolves everything. So I think that there is a chance that all paranormal stuff, and you know, you can't dismiss religion. You really can't dismiss religion, because all they do is talk about paranormal and possible shit. And so there you go, you got that. And what does it do? It creates culture, it creates books, it creates buildings, it creates statues. So it's like, I think the paranormal all of it could be that.
Well, that is exactly why I'm so excited about this moment in history. It's a pivot point to something else, something that will be a renaissance of a new civilization, because the old one only worked so much. Only some people were happy. I mean, I think, of course, Steve, if he was here, he'd be talking about fantasies of utopianism. But, that is what the UFO ET situation avails itself to on some level, a kind of idealized, what Terence McKenna would call the raison d'etre of an ahistorical process that brings us to enlightenment. Or so, in the beginning of Archaic Revival, he says this beautiful sentence. I don't have it right here, but he says civilization is the progression of an ahistorical process to a enlightened, awakened humanity. And maybe this is the hope of the UFO, as opposed to the fear that, that we're going to be taken over, which is, just from what humans have done to each other. So,
I mean, I would argue we've already have been taken over. I mean, in terms of like just the traffic, what it's done to our culture, what it's done to our language, what it's done to our media, what it's done to our whole imagination and all this kind of stuff. So I would argue it's already taken over, not in a hostile way, but I would see it almost more like in an amoral sense. Like all this stuff seems like amoral, but it points to, like, I don't know, the numinous, the divine, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, the greater reality, the larger reality. Shoot, I was going to go. Actually, David, I'd really like to hear your take about this.
Well, actually, what you were saying with the sort of the evolutionary progression of this, or the evolutionary function of it in a way, reminded me of two things that Whitley Strieber had said, which one of them was, we may be witness to what the process of evolution looks like when it is applied to the conscious mind, right? Which is very similar.
love that quote. Can you say it again, David?
We may be witness to what the process of evolution looks like when it is applied to the conscious mind.
That's the UFO. Yes.
Yeah, and that and his experience with the visitors and that, and the other one from Whitley was the describing the experience, right? Describing this whole phenomena is, he describes it as the enigmatic presence of the human mind winking back from the dark.
There you go. That's so, like, exactly it.
And exactly, as you were saying this stuff, it's amazing because, like Whitley in this experience, which has been framed in the media as aliens and, what the media thinks of as a UFO and all of this, right? Like, and even he himself has this ambiguity about it when he's describing it. And yet in his very writing about it, he describes this as this, experience of consciousness evolving, and we're sort of along for the ride in our identities, but then what exists beyond that identity, right, that we're being pulled into, by these experiences of novelty and by these experiences of, the phenomena and the extremity. And, it's interesting too, because he writes about, there's George Hanson, obviously, with the concept of the trickster and the paranormal. That process isn't always kind, there is that element of amorality to it where, it can be fairly extreme, and some people don't, their individuated selves don't make it through the process, and so that's kind of an interesting question.
Jumping on that, David, it makes me think about what there really needs to be going forward with this is, I would want to see like a negative dialectic regarding the paranormal and religious phenomenon. Because
what does that mean? Negative dialectic. Yeah.
So the original dialectic is Hegel saying that, like, there's a push and pull between history, where like things are bad and they reset themselves to try and be a little better, and then they come to a synthesis, right? So you got your thesis, your antithesis, and your synthesis. And it's always going forward to something better. And Marx did the same thing. But the negative dialectic is like, no, it doesn't always get better. And that's what I think is really important that David just pointed out, is that like, just because you have this and then you have that and then you integrate it, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be good. It could be like really, really, it could go either way, because there's plenty of people whose lives are destroyed. Like, people get radiation poisoning and die of horrible cancers from encounters with the UFO. And the Rendlesham Forest guys, they have like heart problems and stuff. So, and you know, and people talk about abduction experiences being the most traumatic, horrible thing in their lives. And then there's poltergeist activity and everything going on at Skinwalker Ranch with like the hitchhiker phenomenon or the Men in Black. So it's like, none of this stuff is necessarily good. And I don't think it's neither necessarily bad, but it does change.
Yeah, but so interesting. Like, one, the Rendlesham thing is interesting because even the experiencers from Rendlesham have a question of whether or not we were, whether that was a you know, sort of technology that wasn't necessarily the actual phenomena, but technology that was in use, maybe trying to mirror the phenomena, or, you know, an attempt of that. So, and with the Skinwalker situation, you know, if you look at all of the people who, you know, were kind of aggressed by the phenomena, they themselves were aggressive.
Oh.
Right. Like, yeah. So if you look, and so that's an interesting kind of, again, with this sort of ask the question of the phenomena, you know, like, what are you trying to say? There's, you know, in Brazil, it gets a little bit more hazy because there's a lot of instances where, you know, the name in Brazil for UFOs, one of the names is chupa chupa, which means this like sucker, because things actually like fly out of the air and will like just suck you up, and, you know, like, but it's not the same kind of thing. So, but in most encounters that, you know, are sort of written about, there is a of someone aggresses the UFO, or someone has negative feelings, or they're projecting some sort of aggression or dominance or something, and then the phenomena reacts to the.
Well, not always, though, because there's been just innocent people who have had traumatic abduction experiences. But I just want to talk about this whole thing about negative dialectics has been the curse of history. You know, we invent fire and it warms us, and then it burns down your house. It's like every technology, every dialectic, you know, thesis, antithesis, synthesis has that double edge to it. Every one of these pivot points in history have both sides to it. That, you know, what did Thomas Jefferson say? The price of freedom is constant vigilance. So it's like, this is where open dialogue about this, you know, instead of keeping this in the military closet for 75 years, we need to look at every aspect of all of that, the awful stuff that Elliot just said, and the possible utopian awakened society that could be the best outcome for everyone regarding this. So we're really stuck at that crisis point, but maybe we're over the hump because, like, the cat's is out of the bag. You know, I love that line in 60 Minutes. I think I said this last week, where Bill Whitaker says to Elizondo, hey, is this stuff real? And Elizondo looks at him like that. Come on. He says, come on, Bill. We're already past that point now. The government has admitted UFOs are real. And when they say UFOs, they are not talking about Chinese or Russian, you know, super disguised aircraft. They're talking about, although they're never saying it yet, otherworldly vehicles or other dimensional. I mean, that's why they've had to change the name to UAPs, because it's actually more than just a vehicle. It is phenomena that's associated, right?
I mean, and just going on the same line, look at like what happened with agriculture. Like, the second you create agriculture, you are now dependent upon it. I've written a long essay about this, as well as this book outlined for it called The Second Womb. And what it's about is how what human civilization does is it makes you dependent upon it, even though it makes you, you know, it gives you all these like, you know, material things, and now I don't have to hunt, but now I have to get a job and have that kind of stress and stuff. So it's always, like you're saying, a double-edged sword. And sort of one of the examples I make about this is you take a nice pampered house cat, all right, and you drop it in the middle of the woods. It's got everything in its body to survive. It's got claws, it's got hair, it's got keen vision. All it needs is a little burrow and to keep warm. You drop like the same situation, drop a naked human being in the woods. First thing they need is clothing. Then they need shelter. Then they need fire. Then they need tools. Then they need rope. So it's like we can't escape our civilization. There's like, no, we have to bring it with us or create it wherever we are, because our bodies are actually extremely sensitive to things like the cold. Like I got a backyard full of house cats in the rain and the snow. They survive every year. They got no problem with it. But put me back there, I could die overnight.
Right.
You know?
Well, you know, the Aborigines have the longest continuous culture or civilization, whatever you want, because they never developed agriculture. There's a book, The Voices of the First Day, Robert Lawler talks about that. So they had everything right there in their walkabout as they would be in the outback or wherever they were. They didn't have to farm. They hunt or gather at a certain location, and then they go on to the next location until they came back around, until things were back in the ground. That is why they, almost survived the white man. You know, the Australians they were the real, like, same thing in this company. But, you know, there is a continuous culture there, and they never developed agriculture. You also have to develop hierarchy. Okay, who's going to be in the field? Who's in charge? Who's counting the crops? Who's selling that? All the negative aspects of civilization come into play when you develop agriculture.
There's something really cool about that. And it's one of my favorite little pieces of studying, you know, anthropology and things like that. But like, take a look. The first multi-story building that they've discovered is a grain silo, a granary. And on the very top of the granary are battle turrets, so they could fight people away from the grain. So it's like immediately, it's like every, that's the thing is I often think about how every development is, I mean, just look at the smartphone or the internet, where it's like, oh, we have this wonderful thing. And it's like, now we're plugged into a hive mind that is completely beyond our purview or control. And, you know, the surveillance capitalism that's emerged out of this. So it's even the smartphone and everything. So it's like, and then, you know, a car is great, but now people can barely stand on their feet for more than an hour, you know? So it's like, there's always and the same thing with like AI, like the same thing with AI that's coming is that like, the worst thing about it is that it's going to be completely unpredictable. And we don't know if it's probably going to make as many problems as many as it does solutions, because every accountant in the world is never going to have a job again in 5-10 years. I went to a conference on finance and banking, and they were talking about automating the entire bank branch with AI and stuff like that. So is it good? It's amoral.
Well, what if that's the fanatical or fantasized hope of the ET that we'll have free energy. No one will have to work. We'll come for what this is my philosophy, we really incarnated for, which is to be creative thinking beings, not to be enslaved to an energy culture. Right. But that's the fantasy. I mean, will that come true if we all have free energy? Will we overthrow the corporate enslavement? That's some people's hope, but the reality is we are still working through that level. And so it's possible the world will change, not because of ETs, but because of the greater mind and the greater advancements that could be possible. Obviously, they're not filling up their gas tank to get here. Who's ever out there?
No, there is element 115 to consider. So it's kind of like maybe they do need a little fuel, but the only one that I would I mean, the only proposal I've seen that's really on the money is probably Jacques Fresco's work with the Venus Project, because I mean, that just makes sense to me, you know, in terms of like, yeah, just automate society and live your life and everything's just like a giant rental library, rock and roll. Yeah, you've seen that stuff, David? You know Jacques Fresco's work?
I've seen a little bit of it. I haven't actually looked at you're the futurist.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, it's like there's no money, no debt, no law. It's basically like the anarcho-communist futurist utopia that like Marx probably imagined in a way. But yeah, it's like and no party, no class, like nothing like that. So super anarchist.
I'm really interested in what Alan had brought up about the walkabout and the Aboriginal style of living, and you know, because as we're describing this utopia, and this idea of free energy, and what do we need energy? We need energy for more machines and more tools and more automation and more smartphones and more connectivity. But you know, there's, I mean, a lot of anthropology about the idea of, you know, telepathic contacts, dream contacts, really interesting stuff talking about in Hawaii, the idea that in the past, and possibly even still, if those traditions have held, the idea, which, you know, in Australia also is there, this dream time, right, where you actually can go into dream time and talk to people and have this communication. You don't need to go on the internet, right? Like we could all go to sleep right now and then go into this space and have this communication, have this thing, you know. And so when I think about, you know, what does the phenomenon mean? And it always seems like there's these two opposing poles, right? Like there's this technological, what it means, which is the free energy and the ships, and we can go out into space and we can do all of, you know, this sort of machine and tech sort of stuff. But then there's also we can become something that we're not now, which is free of all of that stuff, right? And free in a sort of, you know, in a way that doesn't grow out and expand to more technology and more culture and more, you know. And I think this is what Steve keeps trying to hit on, you know. But this, you know, sort of a freedom there, which, you know, not to idealize, you know, the, you know, ancient ways of living in that, or contemporary ways of living that are outside of sort of Western culture, but it seems like something's missing. And I think that, you know, like living in rural Georgia, which is like in a lot of ways living in the ruins of a culture, you know, because I mean really, like I drive past houses that are, you know, sometimes hundreds of years old, and sometimes houses aren't maintained, right? Like, so it's just a crumbling building, and you meet people who are like, well, that was my grandfather's store, right? And it's just this like crumbling building that's still there, right in front of another like building that was built in like the 1950s or something, you know. So 200-year-old building falling down that was the old store, and then the new store built right by it, and it was built in the 50s or the 40s or the 30s, you know. And so it's like,
what about this remnants of culture? Because I have to, oh, go ahead, because I have a story about that, but go ahead, David.
Yeah, well, just real quickly, in terms of like sort of the Aboriginal thing, what I've found though is that like people still survive in this place that's not, you know, I'm from Chicago originally, and I've traveled to New York and all over and stuff, and so there's certain senses of that in big cities, but out here it's like the stuff's just let to fall apart, and people just live, and they live with what they have, and they exist, and they sort of go on. So it's always weird to me, like when I hear about like, you know, free energy and technology, when like I can literally drive 20 minutes and go to a gas pump that's not even digital, it's analog, it's got like a spinning thing, you know, you've got like cranked almost, you know, and so you can't put your credit card in, right? Like it doesn't have that. So you know, it's just sort of a weird thing. So when I think of the UFO, I think of the UFO coming into that, and sort of a more organic, I guess, sort of picture of it. But Alan,
well, no, I was just thinking about when the epidemic, whatever you want to call the pandemic, was at its peak and nobody was going out. I was in New York. I rode my bicycle down to lower Manhattan, where there was completely empty. There's probably 100 or more buildings of, 50, 60, 70 stories tall, and it's empty. There's no one there. And it's like you're walking around. It was like, this is a remnant of a past civilization. And maybe it's coming back or maybe it's not, but it was just so odd to just be around these colossal empty edifices that seem to maintain a meaninglessness.
Yeah. Well, and especially for you, I'm sure that was strange because you like had seen New York at like some of its most vibrant points, and then
I
to go,
guess.
it's just buildings that have no life, no people, no,
Yeah, it's just emptiness. It was like, going to ancient Egypt and saying, who were these people that built these things and why did they build them? And it's like, that last scene of Planet of the Apes where the Statue of Liberty is coming out of the water and we're on a different planet. So again, that's what the ET UFO kind of brings us to this. Again, for me, maybe I'm just like seeing too many movies, but a sci-fi reality, which is the only sort of narrative I can create for it. I mean, I'm pushing against that dialectic there, Elliot.
I gotta tell you, I've written a lot of Zen. I've written about 1,000 Zen koans. I've got a website called Anti-Teachings for Young People. And I
give us one of them.
This
give
is
us
the
a
one
few.
I was gonna give. It's like, if you really want science fiction, just look in the mirror and give yourself a wave.
It reminds me of like some of the John Lennon stuff, reality leaves a lot to the imagination.
Yeah, same kind of zenny, a zenny zinger. That's basically what they are.
Yes, no, they're good, but civilization is, in the process of shifting, maybe because of the whole quarantine, but also on top of that, there's this revelation that either will reveal something drastic or not. Something's in the works that it seems like it's moving in a whole other direction, maybe like the 1920s or the 1820s. Maybe that's just 20 years in, there's a whole right turn or left turn in the way Western civilization or what we call progress is moving. But this is a big one. I think this is.
This is it. There's no going back. This is the moment everyone in disclosure always wanted, which was like, get Congress again, but this time give them something actually with some meat and some teeth to it. So, could it be manipulated? Like, we need to really invest in a space force now, guys, because the aliens are coming to eat your babies. So, that's an angle that you could totally go down. But,
one thing though, I think the UFO as a symbol is more powerful than that. I think that's a transformative potential. And I was thinking about, like, Alan, when you're talking about the buildings, and Elliot, your experience on the bridge, right? Like, where you have all these people and it's a very mundane kind of commute, but then the UFO hovers over there and it's this sort of uncanniness to it. And a friend of mine is an art curator, Eric Colpert, and he's doing a show actually of focused on the UFO as an object in space and in an object in people's lives. And he actually, some of my work is going to be in there, and some of my friend Tex Crawford's work is going to be in there. And Eric had originally contacted me because he was really interested in images of the UFO in everyday situations. So not the UFO is this like super sci-fi in space and all that, but UFO over a farmhouse, right? Like UFO over a city, like real, just normal, everyday, mundane situations. Just because as a symbol, however you picture the UFO, whatever it is, whether it's like an abstract geometric shape or it's a flying saucer, classic saucer, it creates an uncanniness to that everydayness, And so this whole show that he's putting on in Europe, I think possibly next year, everything got thrown off because of the pandemic, but it's going to be focused on that concept. So, like even with the military, And, you know, policy makers and contractors, if they do try to jump on the UFO train and get more for whatever their various programs are, the UFO itself, it's, you know, even to do that, it's a dangerous tool to use as a cultural symbol because it's so revolutionary and it's so unmooring, you know, to the sort of everydayness, you know. I mean, because that, like, if you think about it, like when you saw it on the bridge, you had to like look away, like the
Yeah,
look away,
yeah.
you know, because
But it's getting less revolutionary as it kind of seeps into the papers, into the consciousness. It's like, but I
well,
mean,
you had said that thing though about like the blob, right? Like
yeah,
it's the papers as a blob, and it's seeping into the papers as we don't know what it
yeah,
is. You know,
right.
they're afraid of what that people can't speak, they can't say the actual sort of otherness of it, you know, and
Right.
that otherness there. I think that, you know, if they push anything, because the other thing too is that a lot of this, how much phenomena is tied to, you know, like Elliot was talking about earlier, this idea of you can want the UFOs to come and then they'll show up with the CE5, right? And this is kind of Mark Sims' thing too.
Right.
Blanchett, is if we get more people doing this, right? If we get more people thinking about it and pulling it in and sort of calling it, then we're going to get more phenomena happening.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
and so what happens when, you know, this comes out maybe as a blurry blob and whatever, but then people start to get deeper. Maybe they pick up making contact, right? Like, and
I
start to read
hope so. Yes.
this
Yeah.
other, you know, they
Mm.
start to read more into it and that, and then we have this mass sort of conscious shift, and the actual phenomena starts coming down in a mass way.
Yeah.
But I just want to say anything we see unusual, like I saw the Starlink the other day out here in Arizona, and everyone, because I knew what it was, even though I knew it's these satellites, Elon Musk, it's like, you know, I just kept staring at it because it was so odd to
Yeah.
see this string of lights appearing in the sky and moving together. It's like, yeah. So we need these things to wake us up, even when we maybe even know what they are or not. But if we don't know what they are, they perturb us even more in a good way.
Yeah. I think that's ultimately what it all is. And actually, David just makes a great point because, you know, to take a painting and put a memento mori in it, suddenly there's a skull in the middle of your tableau. It's changed the entire meaning of what's going on in the tableau, which I think is, you know, similar to why Santa Muerte took off. It's like everyday life, and then like, bam, oh, there's a skeleton for you. You don't see that often, but you know you got one going on. It changes everything right away. And I like that idea of like, I mean, any you know, the best way to describe it is when I saw it, it felt like I was a wild dog that had seen a caravan of armored knights on armored horses walk through my territory for the very first time, and I just had this what's that sort of thing. And you know, if it's not UFOs or aliens, I'm pretty sure it's just anything paranormal or, you know, religious that it just makes consciousness work. It makes it work more than just survival mode or pleasure mode. It takes it into, this like uncanny area where the mind has to actually evolve, create new words, create new language, and then recontextualize itself in this larger display.
Yeah. No, so do you think next week or maybe Tom Campbell would want to come and join, like what he thinks about the whole UFO ET?
I'll reach out for sure. I will definitely reach out.
Okay. So any final words from you, Elliot, about because your language stuff was really important. That was really a big piece for me here tonight.
Well, I would say if you like my language stuff, you can definitely read my book, 3 essays on virtual reality. I'm also all over Medium. I write there right now, and I write about kooky stuff like this too. I've got a classic article on there on aliens and BDSM. And if you take away the whole genetic engineering thing, they're almost like BDSM doms. They got you on a table, they're poking you and all that kind of stuff. But that's just my, what would you call it? When you throw out your thing. But anyway, No, in terms of language, I think that, I mean, I'm looking at my room right now. My room is covered in words. I always think my room is sort of like an exteriorized version of my own skull. And it's just all the graffiti all over it, you know? But yeah, I think that that's probably the most exciting thing about the entire phenomenon. And I think all the other paranormal phenomenon just link to that, because look, you invent words like angel, you invent words like, Messiah, you invent words like demon, you invent words like alien. And so that's what I think is what it's really doing. And I hate to just take it into just like a McKenna type of territory. But to me, the most exciting thing about it is going to be like, is what's already happening with our language as we encounter the phenomenon. And once we have an intimate enough, conscious, rather than hypnagogic kind of relationship with them, then we're going to find out what language actually is and what language can actually do.
Great. What language? Yeah. So David, you think we've made, I think we've made some progress this week as we keep, what do you think that is? I mean, if you could sum up how our progress has been progressing.
Well, before I do that, I want to thank Stone Hobbit, who was commenting on the YouTube.
I didn't follow all that. Oh, yeah. Thanks for following the chat. What was Stone Hobbit saying?
She actually sent me some photos of some of her experiences. Thank you for sharing that. That was a good thing. And I'm sorry, I can't, I'm saying that to say thank you to her, but I can't obviously do much to show everybody, but she sent some photos of orbs and entity pictures, which is very
you can't show them to us?
I don't know. Maybe I can share screen. Can I share screen?
Yeah, you could share screen. I can share.
I would love to see this.
I'm going to make you a co-host. Now you could share screen.
Okay, let me figure out how to get this.
Because thank you, Stone Hobbit. Yes. Yeah. This is what the value of a chat is. Yeah. And
I'm pumped. I can't wait to see what this is.
Stone Hobbit, let me see. Never too old. Richard. Bilateral negotiations are underway. Ghost Demon's voice. Oh, there you go. Wow.
These are wild.
Great orbs. Great. Really good. Yeah. Great. I mean, this reminds me of someone that interviewed me recently, also got footage from a morgue. And when they brought in this new body, all these orbs just appeared with this new body as if they were greeting this other spirit there. Isn't that weird?
Wild. That's wild.
That is wild. Wait, maybe I can find that.
In fact, to tell you the truth, my old man was a funeral director, and he said he saw an orb leave someone's circle of Willis. It's a pump in the brain that puts all the blood all over the brain. It's like a mini heart in the brain. It's called the Circle of Willis. It was originally what he was going to name his novel. It ended up being Final Arrangements. But but he said he saw an orb come out of someone's Circle of Willis and fly out a window, and that someone actually ran to open the window to let it go out.
Wow. Amazing.
And I think this was in Georgia too.
David. But those are great pictures. Did she have any description? Do you mind just showing them again and maybe talking about what you're seeing there, David?
Sure. Let me get back to the shows. Yeah, I mean, she had said that in the chat she had described some of her experiences with orbs and then she had sent this photo, sent a couple other ones, but it was more. This kind of covers the whole. So I mean, the one up in the far left-hand corner with the sort of humanoid figures is real similar to something that the Bledsoes captured as well, with sort of an energetic signature of a humanoid sort of form, and then the orbs are similar as well with the kind of texturedness to them.
Nice.
you know, the Bledsoe orbs look a little bit different some of the times, but a lot of that is because they're capturing them in video. So I don't know what these would look like in video. But yeah, I mean, this is really interesting. I think it's a good highlight to some of the ways that these phenomena, you know, we can capture them in film, and they're different though. You know, so this is an interesting thing too, because a lot of this, um, you know, like with the photos they're showing of the UFOs right now, um, you know, they're black and white and not colorful. And here we have, you know, sort of like colorful, what would almost be like a blur in that, but they're more evocative. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This is evocative to the
Oh,
experience.
very interesting. Actually, I found this video where these orbs appeared. I'll show you. At this, and as they brought this body in, did you see that on your screen?
Yeah.
This is where they bring the bodies to put them in these cold chambers. I asked her if I could show this. So, okay, so it's there's something there now. They just
Wow.
brought something. They just brought something in there, and there's a camera that's going all the time. And usually, this kind of stuff doesn't. This is not.
Jeez.
This is
You
not
know,
dust. Yeah.
yeah, what I like about this is that, like, if you look at the direction, I guess the only thing that could be doing that is maybe like an air conditioner, but and maybe kind of making like a swirling effect for dust. But morgues are typically kept spotless. I mean, for
Right.
obvious reasons. But the fact that they keep changing direction, and it doesn't seem like there's a single like breeze that this is flowing on it. It looks like it's very, very interesting.
Yeah, there is no breeze. I usually there's no open window.
Yeah, I guess not. Out here, you don't want a cat getting in there.
But it could be dust park, or it could be beings reacting this after somebody has just been brought in, wheeled in. So, and now they're sort of stopping, I guess, a little bit. But usually there's nothing on the camera.
Wow.
Usually, so it is strange. That's otherworldly, paranormal, whatever it is. We are moving into these weird times where there's levels of reality we have yet to integrate or understand, but they're out there. So hey, thank you. Thanks, both of you. Let us know if Tom Campbell can come next week.
I will.
And thanks, Elliot. I appreciate your research wisdom. And David, just tell me where we what should we what's like what do you see the progression, like I asked before, of where we going in this?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting because each, you know, as different as every week is, depending on who's on, I think that it's like an unfolding, right? Like, so in similar ways that we were talking about this idea of the phenomena and our interactions with it sort of unfolding new understandings, you know, at least from what I found in these conversations with so many different people, and we've had, I mean, how many people? I mean, you were doing this before I started coming.
Yeah. Well, not much. This is kind of the like I guess this is like maybe our 10th part of the series of you know kind of the kind of dissecting a kind of intellectual understanding of what no one has yet to define, basically.
Yeah. And it just it seems to be unfold. And I think one of the things that we sort of touched on a lot more this time is sort of the cultural and societal and you know those sort of things, but then also taking it to a level of how does that come back to the individual, right? Like what is this interaction, you know? And it'll be interesting because I think that we're going to have a lot more to talk about after the report actually comes out, right? Because then we're going to see what's the immediate effect of this and what's even in it, right? Because if they come out and say, well, it's unidentified and we don't know what it is, you know, because there's already skeptics coming out with their, you know, just because it's a UFO doesn't mean it's an alien, and just these stock sort of like skeptical. Scientific American had an expert panel reflecting on it, and the experts were not even necessarily scientists. Some of them were science writers. I mean, it was a real kind of mixed bag. So, it'll be interesting to see where this comes out, and I think, like I said, this time around, we had an opportunity to kind of get a cultural and, sort of look at all these things that we've been talking about with experiencers and.
Yeah. I think, though, we need a new dialectic, someone sort of like what Terence McKenna did was kind of forge these new cultural values based on this incredible intellectual history and brought people. That's why it was so valuable and such a, I mean, at least, of course, the mainstream never heard of, you ask someone on CBS, they'll never heard of Terence who, but people who are looking for like other ways of understanding, he's a hero for formulating what he would call novel ideas, right?
Yeah, and
what?
Real quick, just interesting about that, never having heard. But anybody who's watched Cartoon Network had McKenna just completely downloaded into their brain, right?
In what way? What way on Cartoon Network?
Adventure Time, which is one of their
actually, I don't watch Cartoon Network. I don't know.
I've got nephews and nieces and stuff, so like I hear about it. But Adventure Time, the guy who draws that actually has a comic that's about sort of Gnostic mythology in terms of like the Watchers and that kind of thing. And there's a lot of cartoons on Cartoon Network who the animators, like Steve, right? Steve Spear was an animator for Nickelodeon. So as we have Steve here each week, imagine that all kids that were watching Nickelodeon back in the day and saw the animation of the bee flying and Nickelodeon, that was out of Steve's mind, right? So everyone can watch these things, so he's in the background, right? Like he's not like front and center, but the influence is sort of leaks in.
I just think I was just mentioning it because we need, or maybe it's us sort of, we need someone to kind of forge, it's all of us, I think, maybe that we're forging new ways of understanding that haven't been developed yet. It's sort of like what expressionism was in Germany. It's like that was a new art that just wasn't like anything else in a way. I mean, I guess no art form is, but it started to go beyond the superficial, the surface, and get into the expression of emotion. I guess Van Gogh is about that, but the Impressionists were just about the visual world, and then the mind put it together. But then the Expressionists come along, and they're like doing something to art, which is more about what's inside as opposed to what's outside.
Yeah, and actually, to tell you the truth, McKenna is probably like the best example I can think of someone who actually is McKenna and a lot of poets, but McKenna for sure in terms of being that public speaker, because I'm sure you guys have gone to poetry readings and heard them talk, and you're like really bored when they're casually talking, but when they're reading their poems, it's like, oh, you're melting my mind. McKenna, I think, is probably the guy that is like a prototype of what the human alien hybrid language would sound like.
Right.
Even his glossolalia thing that he would do from his like DMT and ayahuasca journeys and stuff. That's like exactly, I think, what I was trying to allude to.
Yeah, no, he was the orator of but I remember the first time I have heard McKenna, I was in this bookstore and they were playing it just like one of his talks on a loudspeaker. And I just froze. It's like, that is something I've never heard before. It's like, and the language and the expression, it was like alien almost. I had to just stop and absorb all of it because it was new doorways that he was opening. Of course, he was influenced by Gebser and lots of people. I mean, Gebser was a big influence, on both McKenna and Ken Wilber. But McKenna vocalized it. So you're right. It's like, it's poetry in motion.
Yeah.
But yeah. Well, it's been great. Thanks, guys. And thank everyone.
Thanks a lot. I'll see you soon, I hope.
All right. So let us know about Tom Campbell.
I will.
Yeah, and everything else. So Dave, be in touch. And I don't know why Henrietta disappeared, but I thank her anyway.
Bye, Henrietta. Bye, guys. It's good to see you both.
Hey, really good. I'll see you in New York. Okay.
See you there.
Thanks.
Bye,
Elliot.
guys.
Thanks. And we'll go to Chris Bledsoe, David, sometime. Okay.
Yeah.
If he said he came out of his house once, and there were 20 people just lined up on his lawn. I don't think he wants visitors.
No, well, I mean, they had their, as Ryan, his son, joked, they have Southern hospitality, right? So like,
Yeah.
you know, but yeah, I don't know that they don't
Well,
want tourists.
I think I made a good connection. Let's see if we can just introduce ourselves or something. All right.
You can have dinner with.
Yeah. I mean, he's a really just down to earth guy. Just amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right.
He is.
All right. Stay in touch. Thanks. I
Mhm.
like, send me
Okay.
those emails. Okay. See you. Bye. Thanks everyone for watching Alan Steinfeld New Realities. Get the